Nicole Kidman has made her first public appearance since her split from Keith Urban.
We've been through a lot together.
We've got a timeline for it now, and the time it's now.
For nearly 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were Hollywood's golden couple. The Oscar-winning actress and the Grammy-winning country star who seemed to have cracked the code on lasting love in an industry notorious for broken marriages. Their story was the kind that magazines built covers around and fans held on to as proof that real, enduring romance was still possible, even under the crushing weight of fame. But when Nicole quietly filed for divorce in late 2025, something shifted. The carefully constructed fairy tale didn't just end. It began to unravel in ways that exposed truths both had spent years keeping behind closed doors. What followed the filing wasn't silence. It was revelation. Through court documents, concert stages, public appearances, and the whisper networks of those closest to them, a very different portrait of their marriage began to emerge, one that Nicole, in her own measured, deliberate way, has been exposing piece by piece. This is the story of what she revealed, what it means, and why the world is only now beginning to understand the full weight of what she endured. To understand what Nicole Kidman has exposed about her marriage to Keith Urban, you first have to understand who Nicole Kidman really is, not the poised, red carpet figure the world grew accustomed to seeing, but the woman underneath that composure. Nicole Mary Kidman was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, in 1967, to Australian parents who returned to Sydney when she was still a young child. Her father, Anthony Kidman, was a clinical psychologist and biochemist. Her mother, Yanelle, was a nurse and educator. From the beginning, hers was a household that valued discipline, intellectual rigor, and emotional control. These values shaped Nicole profoundly. Perhaps even more than she ever publicly acknowledged. As a child, she was painfully shy. Teachers noted her tendency to blush intensely when called upon, and she struggled to express herself in ordinary social situations. But beneath that shyness was something powerful, an enormous emotional interior that had no outlet until she discovered performance. Ballet came first, then drama classes, then youth theater, and eventually, film. By her early teens, it was clear she possessed something rare. The ability to make audiences feel what she was only hinting at on screen. She didn't perform emotions. She inhabited them, this capacity for deep emotional investment, while the engine of her extraordinary career, also became one of the defining tensions of her personal life. Nicole has never been someone who loves halfway. When she commits entirely. When she protects with everything she has. And when she is hurt, the wound runs deep and stays deep. Her first marriage, to Tom Cruise, which lasted from 1990 to 2001, left marks that never fully healed. The relationship brought her into the orbit of Scientology, a world that many of her closest friends and family members found deeply troubling. When that marriage collapsed, the fallout was devastating on a level the public only partially understood. She lost primary custody of her 2 adopted children, Isabella and Connor, who remained closely tied to their father and to the church. For a woman whose greatest dream was building a family, that rupture was not just a divorce, it was a kind of bereavement. Friends who knew Nicole during those years describe a woman who was outwardly rebuilding with remarkable strength, winning an Academy Award for The Hours in 2003, returning to the upper echelons of Hollywood, while privately carrying grief that most people around her never fully saw. She was performing recovery even as she was living it, which perhaps explains why, when Keith Urban appeared in her life, she fell so completely and so fast. Keith Lionel Urban was born in Whangarei, New Zealand, in 1967, the same year as Nicole, and his family relocated to Queensland, Australia, when he was still young. Where Nicole's childhood was structured and academically oriented, Keith's was marked by financial strain, family tension, and the restless energy of a boy who never quite fit into the ordinary world around him. His father introduced him to country music early, and by the age of 6, Keith was already performing. Music wasn't just a hobby for him, it was survival. Country music, with its unflinching honesty about heartbreak, hardship, and redemption, gave him a language for emotions he had no other way to process. He dropped out of school to pursue music full-time, which tells you everything about both his dedication and his willingness to bet everything on a single dream. But the music industry is a particular kind of pressure cooker, and Keith arrived in Nashville in the early 1990s without a safety net. The years of grinding, of near misses and disappointments before his self-titled American debut album broke through in 1999, took a toll. By the time fame arrived, so had the demons that would follow him for decades. Alcohol and substance abuse became his shadow, intensifying with success rather than fading from it. By the time he met Nicole in 2005, he had already been through rehabilitation. He was, in many ways, a man who had spent most of his adult life being rescued by music and undone by his own appetites in equal measure. He was also extraordinarily charismatic, deeply talented, and possessed of a vulnerability that was completely genuine. He wasn't performing sensitivity the way some celebrities do. He actually felt everything deeply, which made him magnetic and made him dangerous. To himself most of all, what Nicole saw in him, and what drew her so powerfully, was that vulnerability. After the controlled, image-conscious world of her marriage to Tom Cruise, Keith's rawness felt like fresh air. He was unpolished, emotionally exposed, and seemingly incapable of the kind of calculated image management that had defined her previous relationship. She interpreted his fragility as authenticity, and in many ways it was. But fragility, as she would learn over nearly 2 decades, is not the same as stability. Their romance began in January 2005 at the Day USA Gala in Los Angeles, a celebration of Australian talent working in Hollywood. Nicole, freshly emerged from the wreckage of her first marriage and at the peak of her professional powers, was introduced to the rising country star. By her own later admission, she didn't think he was particularly interested in her that night. He was polite but reserved, and months passed before he reached out. When he finally did, something clicked with an intensity that surprised even her. They moved quickly. By the end of 2005, they were publicly a couple. In June 2006, they married at the Cardinal Soretti Memorial Chapel on Sydney's Manly Peninsula. She wore a Balenciaga gown. He serenaded her at the reception. The wedding photos were everything the press had hoped for: romantic, intimate, and deeply personal. For fans of both, it felt like a genuine love story, 2 wounded people finding each other and healing each other. The narrative practically wrote itself. What the fairy tale concealed, however, began to emerge almost immediately. Just 4 months after the wedding, Keith checked himself into a rehabilitation facility for alcohol abuse. The timing was brutal. Nicole, who had committed fully to this man and this marriage, found herself standing beside a husband in crisis before their first anniversary had arrived. She handled it with extraordinary grace publicly, visiting him in rehab, refusing to give tabloids the satisfaction of a public breakdown, presenting a composed and loyal front. But those close to the couple noted something more complicated beneath her composure. Nicole's decision to stand by Keith during that early crisis wasn't simply loyalty, though loyalty was certainly part of it. It was also, observers believe, connected to the loss she still carried from her first marriage. The loss of the chance to save something, to fight for someone, to be the person who stayed when things got hard. With Tom Cruise, she had been left. With Keith, she could be the one who stayed. And so she stayed, with a determination that was both admirable and, in retrospect, perhaps a signal of how much she was investing in a role that would ultimately exhaust her. What followed the early rehab crisis was nearly 2 decades of what insiders describe as a constant negotiation between 2 people who genuinely loved each other but who had fundamentally different needs, different rhythms, and different ideas of what marriage should look like. Nicole craved stability with an urgency that made complete sense given her history. The loss of Isabella and Connor during her divorce from Tom Cruise had left her with a fierce, almost fierce determination to build and protect a family. When she and Keith welcomed daughter Sunday Rose in 2008, and then Faith Margaret in 2010, she poured herself into motherhood with an intensity that was entirely consistent with who she is. Family was not just important to Nicole. It was the thing she had fought hardest for and lost most painfully. It was sacred to her. Keith adored his daughters deeply and genuinely. No one who has observed him speaks about his fatherhood with anything less than warmth. But his life as a touring musician, the relentless schedule, the months on the road, the late nights, the particular culture of the country music world, was fundamentally incompatible with the kind of steady, rooted family life Nicole was building. He was, in many ways, still a restless man, still searching, still more at home on a stage than anywhere else. They implemented rules to try to manage the distance, notably a commitment to never spending more than 2 weeks apart. For a time, this worked, or at least appeared to work. Nicole would be photographed at his concerts, beaming front row. He would thank her tearfully at award shows. They gave interviews in which they described each other in terms that seemed almost too perfect, too precisely worded. She was his rock. He was the one who brought her back to life. The language was beautiful, and it may have been sincere, but even sincerity can become a performance when it is repeated often enough for the benefit of the public. Behind that performance, the couple's differences were running deeper and deeper channels. Friends close to Nicole describe her as someone who grew increasingly weary of carrying the emotional weight of their dynamic. She was, by all accounts, the one who managed the household, managed the children's schedules, managed the family's public image, and simultaneously managed Keith's fragile sobriety with the vigilance of someone who knew exactly what the stakes were. This was not a burden she accepted reluctantly. She had chosen it, and she believed in it. But over time, the weight of being everything to someone who needed everything takes its toll. Keith, for his part, chafed against the dynamic in ways he may not always have been able to articulate clearly. He reportedly wanted to be her partner, not her patient. He wanted her to trust him fully, not watch him with the careful eye of someone perpetually bracing for the worst. The tension between his need for freedom and her need for security was not dramatic or explosive. It was the slow, grinding kind of tension that wears relationships down from the inside, leaving the exterior looking intact long after the structure has weakened. In hindsight, observers who followed their relationship closely say the signs of its fragility were always present, even during the years when the image seemed most convincing. There were the small but telling details in interviews, the way Nicole would occasionally speak about their marriage in terms that framed it as work, as effort, as something that required constant tending. This is not an unusual thing to say about marriage, but the frequency and the particular emphasis with which she returned to the theme suggested she was speaking from genuine exhaustion rather than generic wisdom. She once described marriage as requiring a profound willingness to keep choosing the other person even when it was hard. That framing, romantic on the surface, carries a darker undertone when you consider how many times she had clearly been forced to make that choice in circumstances most spouses never face. There were also the red carpet observations that sharp-eyed observers noted in the couple's later years together. The affection was always present, but something about it had shifted. Where early photographs show two people genuinely lit up by each other's presence, the easy, unguarded smiles, the unself-conscious physicality, the images from their final years together are different. The affection looks deliberate. The smiles arrive a half-beat late. The body language is correct rather than spontaneous. They look like two people who have learned to perform togetherness so thoroughly that they are no longer sure where the performance ends. By 2023 and 2024, the whispers in entertainment circles had grown louder. Reports surfaced of the couple living increasingly separate lives despite maintaining the same official residences. Nicole began appearing at events without Keith more frequently. He was photographed on tour without his wedding ring, a detail that sparked immediate speculation but was quickly explained away by those around him. Still, the explanations felt slightly too quick, slightly too neat. There were also whispers about Keith's rumored closeness with younger guitarist Maggie Ball, which resurfaced publicly around the time of the divorce announcement. Whether those rumors reflected anything real or not, their very existence in the public conversation spoke to a broader sense that something had shifted in Keith's world, that he was circling something or someone new while his marriage quietly deteriorated. Nicole, by multiple accounts, knew the marriage was ending long before she filed the papers. Those close to her say she spent months agonizing over the decision, not because she doubted that the marriage had run its course, but because of her daughters, and because she understood better than almost anyone what it means to dismantle a family. She had lived through that dismantling once before, on the other side, and she had never fully recovered from it.